Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Bruce, the troublemaker, is there by the skin of his teeth. I feel that that the long arm of the law will finally catch up with him. It can't be long now, and we're joined by Richard, who the drone lawyer, who was going to talk a lot about EASA, but luckily lots of legal stuff's come up that we can talk about. And Louis, we're going to talk about his favourite subject, of course, Gatwick, and Ian will no doubt mention the chair very shortly. So with those introductions, the chair introduced, of course, let us go. What should we start with? Let's start
let's go to £800,000.
So, 800,000.
Is that your final bid?
No. £800,000 that the cost of the Gatwick investigation. I think it's a nice start.
But it'll be more than that, because when somebody put a freedom of information request in to get that number out of the police, that was a couple of months ago, and I'd have to look it up in SUS News, I believe it's in. I'd have to look it up to see when that was, but that was a wee while ago that one went in, and a new freedom of information request is going in for an updated number. I will say, to be fair to the police, they were pretty quick in answering that one, and it was all good. There are several Freedom of Information Act requests in and outstanding on the Gatwick incident that aren't being answered. Have you got one in, Richard?
Yeah, I put one in last year, and it's now with the Information Commissioner's Office lawyers to enforce, because I've had no response at all from Sussex Police.
Do you want to borrow my name, Troublemaker?
Sorry, you guys are in England. Isn't that because now there is no Dutch of success? He went to US, so he cannot be there to sign up the papers.
Well, perhaps
it's a exit. Come on,
makes it but the thing is, so with that one, your one in there, and I know some of the other Ian's ones have remained unanswered, and one of mine, can that not all go together? We should have had this conversation off air. Could they not all go together and say, hey, come on, answer? Or when your one is resolved, will they then have to answer all the others?
Well, that's an interesting question, actually. I put mine in last year, and they acknowledged it, as they're bound to do by law. So in terms of grouping them all together, I don't think that can happen, because we all make an individual request.
Right.
And it's an individual request by us, as determined in law, for freedom of information. And mine was all about all the counter-drone stuff that was used. It was about how I became known as a person of interest.
Oh, that's right, because it was your fault. I'd forgotten it was your fault.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where they get the information from? So they acknowledged it, didn't respond, chased them up, gave them more time, failed to respond again, complaint with the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office. They wrote to them, gave them more time again to respond. They failed to respond, gave them a final warning to respond, which is called a determination, I think the ICO call it. A final determination. They failed to respond to that, and then COVID hit just as the ICO were about to instruct their own lawyers to enforce their declaration against Sussex Police. So now, because of COVID, Sussex Police have obviously dealing with the easier FOI requests by the sounds of things, but mine is still outstanding, and I pushed the ICO actually the other week to find out what's going on. And the ICO have taken the position that they're going to act with some leniency in relation to these kind of requests that are not forthcoming or have been late, where they do need some form of legal recourse to get the results that I'm looking for.
I don't quite understand. They're going to act with a bit of leniency, so they're going to let them off a bit.
Not give them a bit more time. I mean, I don't know why they have to give them more time. They've already had tons of time. Have had more time than they need to, and they've got to come to the table at some stage and provide me with information that I've requested. They're legally obliged to do that.
So for me, I would probably, being a layman, would give up. But the trouble they've got with you is you're a barrister, and you probably won't give up.
No, I won't.
Yeah, but is that what they would expect? Is that what they would expect the layman to do? Just to sort of roll over and
Yeah, I mean, what they should do as part of their response in the FOI request is in the event that you're not satisfied, is take the decent option and refer you to the ICO. But I don't know if that always happens, and not everybody wants to engage the ICO because it can be a lengthy process, and you've got to go through everything again, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. So if you don't feel comfortable doing it, then more likely than not you wouldn't. But certainly because this is also personal to me, I want to know why they were phoning me up, asking me to come in for a face-to-face interview over Gatwick.
That was a big mistake, wasn't it, on their part? Why? I know. We'll pick up a couple in a housing estate because the neighbour says he's got a helicopter, and we'll find, I don't know, a CAA barrister. That'll do.
I know. I just don't get it. And you can see from the figures, and I think they disclosed that they had 97 people of interest in the end that they had to question or determine weren't useful to their investigation.
So do we think that's 96 or 97 drone owners then? They simply have just found, well, there's 97 people in that area we think own drones, so they're people of interest.
Could be, I don't know. I have no idea. And that was part of the basis of my Freedom of Information Act request, was to understand how I came to be on their radar.
Because what did they do? Just because you were probably on the radar because you had a PFCO, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, I've got a PFCO. I fly drones. And I was, at the time, I lived near Gatwick.
Yeah, because you work for the Civil Aviation Authority, whose, dear viewers, if you're from overseas, are based at Gatwick.
Was it before or after you appeared on this stream that you became a person of interest?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
Very, very good.
It was actually before in Gary's defence.
Yeah. It's funny. It's something.
Well, did they get all the Gatwick numbers, or did they put a compass and draw a circle on the map and go, all right then, 10 kilometres around here, everyone we can find, BMFA, PFCO, nosy neighbours, go.
And that's my biggest concern with this whole thing is PFCOs, people who've registered, have basically put a target on their head the way the police have basically acted in this. And it looks like if there's an incident in your area, by being a law-abiding drone user, by registering, you're basically putting a big red flag to say, come and kick my door in, nick all my gear, and I have to prove it wasn't me. And that's how many of us have been left in this, because the reality is there was no evidence other than a person saying, that guy up there used to have a drone. And that's what they've done,
Yeah.
So, but I believe that's a UK thing. I read a couple of days on the news that the police was frantically trying to find a driver that was filmed himself driving at 300 kilometers per hour during the Corona crisis on a highway in UK. So, what? It's an easy way to just get everybody that has a drone on a 50 kilometers radius and pull them all in.
Yeah. Look, I live next to three very large installations for fuel, oil, gas. I'm fairly close. All it's going to take is a complaint from there, and I suspect I'm going to get a knock on the door simply by being a registered PFCO and being a drone registered person. And it's wrong. And that's, the reality is nothing they've told anyone has made anyone think otherwise. And that's the worst part about this. All they have done is closed ranks. They've said nothing. There's been no information. And all they've done is try to go hide. Nothing happened to you. Nothing to see you. Move along.
Yeah, and I think from that perspective, when you look at the provisions of the drone bill and how that's drafted, I don't think it's going to get any better. I'm now in conversation with a couple of members of the House of Lords because the drone bill's going through the House of Lords. And what I've asked them to do is exclude drone operators from the police aspect of the drone bill. Because when you look at the way that the drone bill was drafted and how it was informed by the UK's counter UAS strategy. And it was all about capturing the drone operators that are smuggling contraband into prisons. But what they've done, because they've adopted that strategy, is they've captured absolutely everybody, including commercial operators. And my written piece to not only my MP but also to members of the House of Lords, because it's making that transition through at the moment through the House of Lords through a number of discussions, is to say to the House of Lords, look, this has been, even one of the House of Lords, I read up the Hansard review, and Hansard is a record of everything that's said in the House of Lords. One of the members of the House of Lords himself said that the law is badly drafted, but it's still going through. So I'm trying to get in there and influence that drone bill now by speaking to a number of members of the House of Lords and saying, look, this isn't fair, it isn't right. And when you look at the police powers, they are so one-sided that they could literally take out a drone operator's business in one day, because they have the power to confiscate your equipment if they believe that you've been flying unlawfully.
They just have to believe it. They just have to believe it. They don't have to prove it.
That's all they need, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what other things could I do to get myself banged up where the copper just has to? What's an example of something else where a policeman believes I've done something with no evidence, so get my gear taken away?
That's a really good question. I mean, a lot of what they do in terms of arresting people is based on belief or suspicion or something more than that, which is stronger in terms of evidence.
This is not unprecedented, though, because here in New Zealand they have a Proceeds of Crime Act, which means the police can seize your property on suspicion that it is the proceeds of a crime. They don't even need to lay charges, and they can still seize your property. There is no burden of proof. It is outrageous, and it's a precedent that's obviously been applied to the drone thing in the UK.
Yeah,
we've had it in the UK.
We have the Proceeds of Crime Act in the UK too.
We've had a similar thing. Photographers have had issues. Yeah, photographers have had issues for a few on and off. As soon as the anti-terror laws come in, they were being thrown at certain photographers at one point saying, no, you can't take a picture of that because it could be sensitive. And there was quite a lot of hoo-ha about that a few years ago. I know someone who has been threatened with anti-terror law just for flying his drone and visually filming some of these installations, which aren't sensitive. These are, you go on Google Maps and then the police knocked on the door because the installation made a complaint. And literally the threat was, you either remove the video offline or we confiscate all your equipment. So, there's clearly a level of you've only got to look at the paperwork. The paperwork says for all the regulation around remote ID, this is not about safety. This is about security. And this is what this is all about. It's about control.
Well, that's right. And that's what's written in the recent CAP documents. When they talk about remote identification, it's all about security and privacy. No. It's not about safety.
But it's not about our privacy. That's the argument.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. And that's the whole question in UTM, I think, when we look at privacy.
But with security, how many? Well, I'd ask them, can you please cite the number of instances where a radio controlled model aircraft has actually posed a threat to national security? Can you please cite these cases, or are we solving a problem that doesn't exist?
Oh my God! Haven't you seen the videos from Venezuela? That's one for you, Bruce.
No, model airplane, Louis, not drones. I'm talking model aircraft because we're all under the same rule set. I would challenge them. You're not differentiating, so please tell me the number of occasions on which model aircraft have posed a threat to the national security, and if they haven't, why are you implementing these completely unqualified rules? That
aren't model aircraft supposed to fly on approved fields? So as long as they comply with the rules.
Again, what is the reasoning? Show me where flying outside approved flying fields has posed a threat to the national security. It never has. You can't say, we're going to mandate that everyone wears a hard hat because one day a piece of rock might fall from the sky and kill them. No, I'm sorry.
Bruce,
it has to be. Bruce. Where's the risk assessment for this?
Lawmakers are so good for us. They even give us our own private playgrounds for everyone. So
they don't give them to you. You've got to pay for them.
No, come on. We pay for so many things, but that's just a drop in the ocean of what you have to pay.
I can only think of maybe one example where drones have been a threat to national security, and that's the weaponized drones that ISIS have used against foreign troops That's the only time I can think of something like that being used. But of course, they're in a fairly unregulated environment and not subject to any laws at all.
And it's hardly recreational use.
It's not recreational use at all.
Yeah,
that's right. Which is why I prefaced what I said by, it's a fairly extreme piece. But that's the only.
The comments. Let me just jump back. Someone asked a comment about redoing. I'm trying to get back up to it. Redoing. Here we are. Here's a silly question before we dive further. Silly question. Anyone reselling Inspire 1 batteries or Phantom batteries? Are they making them good again? Do we know anything about that team before we continue on down the road?
Yeah. Are we talking about reselling the packs? Yeah. There is a lock mechanism in the firmware that if the capacity jumps above a certain level, because it monitors the capacity over the life of the battery, and if it changes over a certain level, it locks the board out completely. It can be, a couple of people have tried, and most of the time it's worked for like 1 or 2 charges, and then it just kills itself.
Well, there we are. I knew we'd have an answer in there. But so, all right, let's go back to the boo-boos mentioning the North Sea terrible thing with an F-15 yesterday, and 2 others returned squawking emergency as well. So I'm not quite sure what really happened there. So 3 F-15s. So yeah. UTM. You mentioned UTM briefly there, Richard. There's nothing wrong with UTMs. We should all connect to them whilst we're flying, and they're the future. They're going to open up the skies, be VLOS, and I'm going to make myself a fortune because of UTMs. That's right, isn't it?
It could be. It depends on where you're going with it, to be honest. I think there's, I participated in a conference a couple of weeks ago as an observer. I wasn't speaking, and they had a 5G network provider there who was talking about the brilliance of 5G and how great it's going to be to transfer data, communicate data, and everything else. And I said, well, this is great. So, especially if you're using it and you want to use it in a sense of avoid capacity. What is he doing?
5G is dangerous, Richard. You've got to be careful.
I've been blowing them up where I live.
I can sell you a USB stick. I'll sell you a USB stick that will provide a dome of safety for you. It's only £278.
I've got £500 version because mine is GPS enabled.
But has that been approved by your local council? Council approved the £278 one.
Were they? Oh dear. Tell us about UTM some more, Richard. Tell us. Sorry,
Richard.
That's all right. No problem. I asked the question. I said, well, this is great if you're relying on 5G and that's the only form of comms you've got in your platform. What happens when you have a cell network outage like a famous company in the UK did last year for a couple of days? Where do you go? Well, we don't know. So who accepts liability if you have a collision in the air or with persons, vessels, vehicles, and structures? We don't know. So what's your pricing model? Well, we're going to price per user, per month, and that's how we plan to do it. Okay, well, that's interesting. And then, but per user, you never guarantee performance. You never guarantee 100% network coverage 100% of the time. So who actually is going to accept that level of liability? We don't know. And this is really interesting. That's just one area of UTM where they're saying that they can deal with low-level flights, so anything sub 400 or EASA or US 500, depending on what document you read. How do we deal with this in an urban environment? Well, 5G is the answer. Well, is it really? I don't know. Is my answer, truthfully, I don't know if that is the answer, but legal liability remains.
And is that your gripe with UTMs really, is where does the buck stop?
Yeah, in part, it is. And that's what I'm doing a PhD in with Cranfield University, looking at drone law and the legal liability around UTM frameworks, but also how we're now starting to see more local law encroach upon the permissions of operators. So local law versus state law. And to give you an example of that, if you want to fly over the Thames in London, a London Ports Authority will say you can't fly there because we need to see your permissions, which I've already provided to CAA. We need to see a copy of your insurance, which I've already provided to the CAA. We need to see your risk assessment, which I've already provided to CAA. And by the way, you have to fill out our form and pay us a fee. And what you'll quite often find is they will bolt the fee on to a filming unit for an A-list type film. And that's what I found up in Scotland, where I live, around the Stirling Monument. They wanted to charge me £200 to take some footage of Stirling Monument. And I tested this and I said, well, why do you want to do that? Well, we need to see all your documentation. And it turns out a £200 fee is for taking off and landing on their site.
Okay, so if you take off next door?
Exactly. And I said to them, I said, well, you do realise you don't own the airspace.
Yeah. Below the castle there, isn't there? Yeah, I know where I go. Yeah.
Yeah, if I find a local area which I can use, which conforms with my risk assessment, and I'm flying safely and doing everything properly, and I fly towards the Stirling Monument, they can't say anything. But what we're finding is, like London Ports Authority and others, they are starting to put in place more restrictions about where you can fly, is how they're saying it. But it's not where you can fly, it's about where you take off and land.
And interestingly, multiple places have replicated London's Thames's terms and conditions, including the local one to me, who tried to say no one is allowed to overfly the entire Haven area. Right. And it was like, no, that's not exactly how it works. You know.
No. So here's the legal rub. London Ports Authority say they have a bylaw in place to stop you from doing it. I checked. There is no bylaw. Right. The purpose of a bylaw is to put in local laws that aren't addressed anywhere else. Right. And a bylaw has to go out for public consultation. If it's a duplication in law, you can object to that organisation putting a bylaw in place. Right?
So then the sort of in place would be the stuff that the civil aviation already has in place for flying in airspace, blah, 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 blah. And right. So you'd be having to, oh, the CAA missed this bit, oh, we'll do it for them.
Yeah.
Now, speaking about the inconsistency in global regulations, here in New Zealand, the civil aviation has said property owners may give or withhold permission for people to fly drones over their property. Doesn't apply to aircraft, only drones. So here in New Zealand, we have groups saying you can't fly over our property unless you pay us large amounts of money. And there's a legal backing for that because CAA has ceded that control to the property owner only for drones. So why? Why?
Well, that's a really interesting point, and that goes directly against one of the principles of ICAO, where airspace should be equitable for all users.
Gosh, it almost seems to me like a particular UTM whose business model started with people paying to stop drones flying over their properties about 10 years ago. Maybe you have the ear of your civil aviation authority, because that's exactly how their business model worked, or was going to work, was that you would say yes or no, and people would pay to have drones not fly over their properties. But isn't it the thin end of the wedge? Aren't they then inviting, once people have got the idea that they can say no to drones, aren't they then going to say, well, I don't much like those light aircraft either, really. How come I can stop drones flying and I can't stop those light aircraft?
It's interesting, though, because you can get an exemption from that piece of law by paying CAA a huge amount of money to get certified under Part 102. So it's multiple tiers. You know, it is for the commercial operator, they can avoid that by paying money. So it's not a safety thing. It's not anything other than it's a revenue thing. And it is just like, this is the whole thing. This concept of safety has been abused for so many different reasons when it comes to regulating the airspace and drones in general. And the UTMs are just another step in that thing. Let's pay per flight. Let's clip the ticket on everything. So 5G want to clip you on a monthly basis. UTMs will want you to pay on a monthly basis. It's like getting worse and worse and worse. They said, things will be really bad when they tax the air we breathe. Well, actually, if you look at it, it's exactly what they're doing now.
Yeah. It's a problem.
Have you got? I think you mentioned before we started. You spoke about, maybe you can walk us through those slides, and then we'll go back to Gatwick and all the other stuff.
Sure.
Maybe you can would like to hear about your slides and your thoughts and all
I'll
this.
be happy to. So, for the purposes of everybody that's listening, I'm doing a PhD at Cranfield and looking at the legal framework of UTM and how that's going to develop in the future. So it's a 5-year part-time program. But what I want to get from it is, I have a permit for commercial operations too, and what I want to get from it is a bit more certainty around where we're going with the law. And what I was going to also add, when we talk about the recent changes to the EU law, is why the UK isn't doing more than it could do now that we're leaving EASA. So I'll quickly run through some of these slides, and I hope everybody finds it interesting.
Are you guys leaving EASA? Because EASA is not. No, it's a valid question. I believe EASA is not EU body.
I think we are, and I think they're beginning to remove some things.
I think it's independent of any EU structure.
Yeah, it is its own separate body, but it's still responsible to EU regulations, because that's the EU.
They provide the regulations to EU.
But it's the EU institutions that give EASA the power to regulate, fundamentally in law. So as we know, UTM operational concept ultimately needs to develop as regulators grapple with lots of issues around it that relate to legal responsibility and accountability as drones increase. And I think what's really interesting here, when I speak to a lot of people about UTM, all I get back in terms of where they are and what they're doing is the tech. And some really interesting conversations we've had. What comes first? Is it going to be the technology, or is it going to be the law? Or is it going to be the law or the technology? And what we need to do is get to a point where both can almost run parallel, because otherwise we're always going to be in the same position where the law remains out of date, as it always does, and then has to play catch up. Right? So what we want to do is look at how this can develop. So what's the problem here? Well,
it's Bruce flying. That's what the problem there is. I can see it straight away. It's Bruce is flying.
Yeah. Oh, is that one of Bruce's drones? Is it? Yeah. Sorry, Bruce. And we know there's some great applications for drones, and we've certainly seen that with COVID, and we've certainly seen how the regulator's slightly bending a little bit around medical stuff, and the DFT is slightly bending a bit in the UK in order to facilitate that. And we're also seeing it stateside as well, as some really good use cases develop. But what we need to do is establish the infrastructure so that it can be safely managed, and then we can all use BV loss, low altitude, in the airspace, regardless of the type of platform that we want to put in the airspace, and regardless of the type of application we also want to use it for. And I think there's some real challenges around understanding what are the legal responsibilities, and I'll come on to that in a second. So the aim is I want to develop a regulatory framework that's recognizable and compatible with the evolution of technology required to support UTM, and also so that it evolves so we end up with a mature UTM ecosystem which will support commercial operations in accordance with national and local law. And I think what we're going to find in the future, the local law piece is actually going to play quite a significant part in the way that we fly fly drones in the airspace at different times, different places, different altitudes. And local legislation will play a part in influencing the development of that framework. And I think that's been significantly underestimated at the moment. So we look at some use cases. Oh, sorry. And here, this is the flight that happened around January, where they put I think it was in Glanbedda in North Wales, where they put the defib on the beach. Great use case, and it works. But when we look at all the different companies that are coming at it, which I've listed on the left, that's nowhere near what we're seeing around. It's nowhere near what we're seeing around the world. That's just a fraction of the companies who all look at risk differently, and they're applying their own model the way that they see it's going to be or going to be applied? I'll come on to that question in a minute because it's a very good question. And when you've got all these companies coming at it from different angles, and you've got them mixing it in different regulatory environments around the world who all view risk differently and are going to regulate differently, how are we going to have a simple legal framework for UTM? We're not. And one of the reasons why we need a UTM is when drones start flying cross borders, because you're going to need to have that transition of identification of a platform from one jurisdiction to another, one airspace to another. And I can give you an easy example. Let's say I'm a farmer in Northern Ireland, and I have farm fields Northern Ireland and in Republic of Ireland. I'm actually going to go through 2 different jurisdictions. But when you tie that in with the EU's opinion on UTM, they're talking about a number of different companies or framework providers operating different use spaces within the same framework, the same regulatory environment. So potentially I could have 6 or 7 different companies that I've got to fly through from a UTM perspective.
Hang on, what do you mean by, so on a single flight, because they're letting it happen this way, you might have had to get permission or interact with multiple companies. Is that what you're saying?
To a degree, that's right, Gary. So I would have to, first of all, get permission from the state that I'm flying to. The UTM system and the transfer of information from one jurisdiction to another would have to be compatible so that they communicate, because that could be a requirement to the state that I'm flying to. And also, the way that the use space opinion is written, it would mean that if I'm flying BV loss, which is one of the other reasons why we need a UTM, to enable sense and avoid or detect and avoid, whatever way you want to describe it, I could potentially go through a number of different use space companies as I'm making my flight from one jurisdiction to another, because they have the mandate from the National Aviation Authority to regulate that sector of airspace.
And quite simply, in the manned world now, it would be hello Dublin, this is hello Scottish, I guess, from Northern Ireland. I don't know. It would be 2 air traffic agencies. It would be one air traffic agency handing the aircraft over to another, and that would be Index.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit lost as to, or one company couldn't work all that whole both sides, or I'm sorry, I'm ranting. You carry on.
Yeah. So we'll come on to that in a second. And the UTM RIBAT creating a solution for a problem that does not exist. That is potentially one view, but another view might be, well, with the proliferation of drones and the way that drones are being flown in more urban or congested areas, how do we otherwise monitor what is in the airspace, and how do we avoid collisions? So my view is that at the moment, this is completely embryonic to infant. That's where we are in terms of BV loss when you're looking at the UTM concept. And then you look at the money that's going to end up behind it. We're talking billions of dollars in 10 years' time. And let's have a look at UK. We're still using temporary danger areas. NASA have gone through their TCL program, and they've referred the findings onto the FAA now, which has put them into, I think, 7 or 8 different BV loss trials. And there was a small piece in New Zealand with AirShare at Bethel's Beach, and I don't know too much about it, but I know somebody that might.
Yeah.
Louis?
Yeah, Louis.
One thing that I remember here, now this UTM thing's supposed to provide BV loss capabilities. I honestly, I don't think it can, because until all aircraft have to have transponders, including in Class G airspace, which they don't at the moment, and there's no plans for them to have that in Class G airspace, then you cannot legitimately fly a drone beyond visual line of sight, regardless of UTM, because the UTM will not necessarily know about the manned aircraft. And we know that manned aircraft regularly fly below the 500-foot minimum. And virtually every country in the world says that unmanned aircraft must always give way to manned aircraft. So if there is a collision between aircraft being run by, or a drone being controlled by UTM or directed by UTM, and a manned aircraft in Class G airspace with no transponder flying below 500 feet, it's still the drone operator that's at fault because they failed to yield right of way to a manned aircraft.
Yeah, that's right. And you do have to do it. I have flown drones and I've had to yield to military low-flying aircraft. And in Scotland, and one of the questions here is that there's a separation of potentially 600 feet. Well, that could be for manned aviation, but for helicopters and low military flying aircraft, that's a different question entirely.
Yeah.
And so,
two aircraft went past me here today, below the height of the house. So, they managed to get through. They weren't transponding. They got through the vertical Africa Radius B FLARM OGN system. I didn't see them coming. Well, I saw them.
Yeah. I've had a Puma helicopter flying past my house at around 200 feet a number of times. And they're allowed to do it because they have the mandate to do so as military aviation. But let's have a look at this. So this is the ConOps that the FAA provided. NASA provided when they did the TCL. This is version 1. They've now published version 2, so apologies for it being slightly out of date. But what we're looking at is you've got all these different players that revolve around the UAS service supplier, and we've got to provide all of these services on the left-hand side. How do they all interact with each other? What is the legal basis for doing that? Who is going to prescribe the law? How is that law going to function? How are the parties going to contractually offset any liability between themselves? So some real technical and complex legal questions have to be asked. For example, if I'm flying my drone, I'm connected into a UAS service supplier, and I'm relying on the fact that they've got accurate airspace geofencing that they're getting from a third party, and I crash my drone. Who's responsible? Is it me? Is it the UAS service supplier who's giving me the service, or is it the third party that's providing that service or that information to the UAS service supplier? How do we get to that point?
No, it's going to depend on the contractual terms of what you sign with that provider. If they say they're not liable, they won't be liable, and they'll escape like mad.
Potentially, that could be the case. But if the regulations are written in a way that is not the case, then we have some other issues at play. And this is. What do
you mean by that? What are you suggesting there?
So if the law is drafted in a way that means that the NAA can appoint a UAS service supplier, and within that umbrella, they have capped liability, for example, on any claim made against them, and that's written in law, then potentially your contractual claim is only going to go so far.
Yes.
In terms of liability. I mean, I don't know where it's going to go, and this is part of my research. This is what I intend to do over the next 5 years, is try and work out some of the answers to these questions. But what I am going to need from the drone community are some case studies where they are looking at BV loss and they are looking at using some form of UTM system. So that through those case studies, we can start forming policy, which is what in part the CAA sandbox is trying to do, where they form policy, and from policy, we get to hone that policy until it becomes so refined that it can then become law. What I want to do is get to that point where we're actually starting to use good law, and we'll come on to the EASA stuff a bit later, Gary. But the point is that when we look at this, it goes on in terms of information and what's got to be provided. And I looked at in the EASA regulations, for example, data exchange protocols. In a couple of years' time, we've all got to fit some sort of identification device to our platforms. And in there, when you look at the law, it talks about it's got to communicate on a basis with a mobile device. But it doesn't talk about the data exchange protocols, what they look like, what the information architecture looks like, what happens if you've got no coverage to your mobile device, or how frequently it's got to communicate with your mobile device to determine vector and everything else. But none of that's in there. But apparently we've all got to buy this device and stick it on our drone.
Well, again, I refer you to the thing in New Zealand with flying over houses. A particular UTM service has bought into radio providers, of technology providers, and their shareholders in chip makers, in order to sell you said device. What worries me is that the authorities don't seem to be watching some UTMs very closely, and they're allowing their ears to be bent by people with vested interests in every little bit of this pie. I bet if you looked at all your talking points, you'd find they've invested in all of these talking points in one way or another. They'll own a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit.
It's even worse in New Zealand because our airshare organisation is partly owned and funded by CAA and Airways. There's so much interconnection between the regulator and an agency that's setting up to create a UTM. So the rules are naturally going to be tailored to suit the needs of the UTM, which is not necessarily the needs of the drone community or the aviation community. It's about how can we get the most money out of people. And that, I think, is a relationship that should simply not exist. And the Airways Corporation has a huge say in the regulations as they're crafted. They're on the board of, review board and everything. And it's like, for example, the hobby doesn't even really get a voice, yet we still represent over 85% of all the RPAS operations in the country, and we don't have the voice that the others do, because they're the ones that are going to benefit financially out of this. It's unreasonable.
Yeah, the pricing mechanisms are very sketchy, especially when you look at quite a lot of those UTM providers around the world. How they're going to price it and what the pricing model is going to be is very interesting. Yeah, we do have other laws that protect property from damage, and they are in place, and they can be relied on to a certain extent. And so use cases. So we've got the 3 categories here for EASA, and we've got the no-draw zone. And where are we? And it's looking at how over the next. Yeah, I get the point of 2 years remote ID as opposed to 5 years doing a PhD. The PhD is going way beyond just remote ID. But how do we interpret the law, the legal risk, and the competing interests of UTM in different jurisdictions? And we're going to see that a lot, just simply because regulators will view risk differently, and we're already seeing it here in the UK when compared to what EASA is doing. The standard scenarios are not coming in. Because the CAA will view that risk differently. And yet when you look at the wording in what they've written, it sometimes intimates otherwise. So I think, taking the whole in, where do we go? There's a legal lacuna. Lacuna is basically a hole in something. So we've got a legal hole in relation to the framework of UTM in many different jurisdictions. It's arguable that the basic structure of ATM is out of date and not fit for purpose because of the fact that it's got to integrate all these new technologies. The USA and EU are developing their own UTM structures now, and they're going forward with it. But the legal framework of that is really embryonic. I think the FAA are just starting to get to grips with how they're going to translate what NASA have done and what they're now doing into some sort of written law. We've seen many global trials that are going to give us much more informed learning around BV loss. I mean, you could pretty much go to most sophisticated jurisdictions, even unsophisticated jurisdictions, depending on how you describe what they are. But we're certainly seeing a lot now where there's a lot more active BV loss. And from that, we're definitely getting much more informed learning. And I think that really underpins some of what we're doing in terms of forming policy. Capability of law enforcement, we've already spoken a little bit about that earlier on. And I think that is going to be one of the challenges with drone legislation, especially when you look at the way that the drone bill in the UK, for example, has been framed. And if that's going to be the basis of regulation going forward, it's going to create us a few problems, I think. Capability of the regulator is clearly going to be one. And what's really interesting is in EASA, they've allotted the state government, if you like, to set up an alternative to a CAA within the regulation sphere. Public perception is always key, and we all know that. And as I've already spoken about some of the challenges of UTM, framework, pricing, tech, liability, insurable risk. What risk are insurers prepared to underwrite when it comes to the UTM and flying BV loss on a regular basis? Has anybody really tested that and questioned it? And I think some real questions there when you look at some of the liability that can happen within the framework, as I showed you in that FAA ConOps model. Where does insurance fit within all of this? And ultimately, how are we going to offset liability within any contractual mechanism that we have between us all? And that was it.
How is this going forward without there being an army of lawyers already onto this? Why are you the man research? I'm a bit lost. How come it's come down to you?
Well, I'm quite passionate about it, Gary. Being somebody that's flown drones and having worked for the CAA in the UAS team, I love the technology, and I know that this technology can do a lot of good, and I just feel that to a degree, in the UK especially, I think we're just holding ourselves back too much. I think we've got to be a bit bolder about some of the decisions we make and take, and some of what that is about in terms of, because I am legally qualified, I understand some of the legal constraints around this. And if I can try and do something that ends up meaning that I can, help the industry in a positive way, then that would be great. That's part of my outcome, really.
Fair play to you. It's mentioned in Simon Since one of the best thought-provoking ones, and it is. We've already uncovered or spoken about lots of things that just blow my mind, and I can't believe what's happening in our world, really. Craziness. It's craziness. So let's jump to the new EASA stuff. The original reason I was going to get you along. Ian will be on top of this, I'm sure, as well.
Ian's very good at this. I've been watching Ian on many occasions.
You're his other viewer.
Yeah.
Damn it! I was trying to hide that. Why have you blown my cover?
And other Ian, check your PMs because
yes.
I'm sure Louis would like you to talk to him about Gatwick as well.
The other one's a recluse now. He's hiding in his garden, Gary, playing with bottles.
In his tropical LED lit garden. Yes.
Yeah. He's probably electrocuted himself and he's still passed out somewhere. He concerned me the other day because he was doing wiring, and it was like, oh god.
So tell me about EASA. What's happening there?
Okay, so obviously this week we've had the updated 1789 from the CAA, CAPSAT 1789, which does clarify a few things, actually. The first version was very mysterious in the sense of they were referring to updated information from the EASA, which is 945 and 947, yet the information they were referring to wasn't published. So they were saying, we've visually seen what's going to happen, therefore we're putting it in the regulations.
Yeah.
But they were referring to it, but you didn't have any base to go from. You couldn't actually go and look at it and go, well, what do you mean about this? And whilst that is very much still the same today, they have clarified a few things in this updated. And it is, as I thought, with regards to remote ID, for instance, that in the open category, the requirement is there for class C1, C2 and C3 to have remote ID. And what they've now added into the specific category is also the requirement for the pilot to have remote ID.
Yeah.
So they haven't shifted the whole thing. Originally, I thought they'd shifted the requirement for remote ID entirely on the pilot, and they haven't. So in the open category, it's as per the hardware. And in the specific category, it's as per the pilot requirements to have it, just like he's required to register.
So you mean that you'll have to go to the veterinary and put the chip as dogs? That's what it says?
Yes. You have to go and be injected. Now, what is a bit more concerning in this is all of the legislation, actually, that's been heaped upon within the specific category. Because when we looked at this originally, the basic thought was your existing aircraft today won't classify under open, so you'll have them in transition if you want to, So, for instance, something like the Mavic 2 can go in the traditional category, whereas the Inspire 2 is a bit big and outside that, and you'd end up in the specific. But there's a whole host of requirements now tossed on the specific, like you have to follow either a standard operating procedure, or you will have to apply for permission to be able to fly. So it isn't going to be as simple as just saying, my legacy aircraft, I'm now going to fly it the same as I was today, because that's the permission you're going to have. But you will have to actually comply with the requirements of specific, which is either requesting a permission or providing an operating procedure, how you're going to operate, or operate within one of the few standard procedures that they've already put out. But when you look at them, that is virtually what a commercial operator has to do. You have to have a risk assessment, you have to have everything in place, you have to have insurance if necessary by your government. So actually, whereas we thought originally it's okay for the guys who won't have remote ID, you can fall under specific, it's not that simple anymore. And I don't know if Richard's delved into it as much as I have or had a look in. And, you know, actually, should I put something? If I put it up, Gary, have you?
Yeah.
How do I share
it? And I will share it on.
Yeah, share screen. There we go. Let me just close my pornography 1 second.
Yeah.
Just as always, you know what it's like.
Well, on that one particular monitor, yeah, but you've still got it showing on the other one.
Still show it on the other one.
Good.
Now, this is the reference document that they're referring to in it. So this isn't CAP 1789. It's the impending regulations as a result of it. And I've highlighted a few areas. The first is basically operations in the specific category should cover other types of operations presenting a higher risk. And what they're saying here is, if you're not able to comply in the open category, which all existing aircraft won't be able to do, then it's a higher risk. So they're automatically assuming all flight that we do today is going to be a higher risk than what is coming in the future. And as a result of that, they're bundling you into certain things and standard scenarios, for instance. So to fly in the specific, so you own an Inspire 2 today, it will not comply with the open categories from the end of the year. So you're going to have to fly in specific, and you're going to have to fall under the standard scenarios that they've published and give them a list of mitigation measures that you've been done and through that. Now, Article 11 is the rules for conducting a risk assessment. That wasn't important.
Oh, Ian, just on that, if I may.
Yes.
So when you look at their document and they have got their FAQs, question 16 says that you should use the OSC methodology.
Yes.
Okay, as opposed to, the question was, am I compelled to use SORA when I apply for an operational authorization? Okay.
Yeah.
They said, no, you can continue to use OSC methodology. However, you subsequently, if you choose your own methodology, which you can do, and it complies with Article 11, a subsequent assessment may take longer to assess by the CAA staff and hence incur an increased charge.
Yes.
Hey!
But then when you look into the documentation, it says that SORA will be applicable at the end of the year. Right? So you can do the CAA OSC risk assessment, yes. You can do the SORA later on, but then if you do your own, it's going to incur more money. That, for me, does not ring true at all, and it should not be the case. It should be irrelevant as to how you've compiled your risk assessment, as long as you've compiled it properly.
Yes.
Whether it takes longer to assess or not, I think is irrelevant. And the fact that they've put it in there, that they want you to charge for you, is because they're driving you towards CAP 722, so you use the OSC methodology. And I know why, because of my time at the CAA, because it's easier. And that's ultimately what it is.
So they can tick it through a set of certain checks that they've got already in place, can't they? They can just run it through that way. Yeah.
But you know, the legislation set up so that you can choose what you want to do ultimately, and what they're saying is, no, well, you can, but it's going to charge you more.
Yeah.
And
but the interesting thing about this, thing about this is this applies to everyone. This isn't just commercial operators. This applies to anyone who cannot fly within the open category, and that includes Model RC. Here, because there's no stipulation in any of this for Model RC. So now anyone with a plane is going to have to comply with the requirements under Part B of UAS operations in the specific category.
Except if they're flying on approved flying field, right?
Flying fields, yes. It's feeling very much like the US now. It really is. And, when you go into, they're saying here, she'll provide competent authority with an operational risk assessment for the intended purposes in accordance with Article 11, all the usual, below 120 meters. But this is the bit which is where the remote ID comes in, is down here, which is under the requirements for the responsibilities of the UAS operator. And right at the bottom, past all of the noise, literally right at the bottom, it's there, look. Have an active, ensure that each individual unmanned aircraft is installed with an active and up-to-date remote identification system. Yeah. And that is where they bundled this in.
What is an active remote identification system?
Okay.
Can it be a banner? Can it be a banner?
No, it has
Can it be lights?
Yeah.
It's not defined.
It is.
In Part 6
Where?
of the delegated legislation.
So it either has to be open, which is accessible by any smart device, or they've added in the option of a network capable. Yeah. But it has to be a compliant system. Now, to be fair to the EU regulations, making a compliant system doesn't look like a massive barrier compared to the US. If we looked at the US, it was impossible. Whereas Europe,
that's what PF conceded did and announced on the pilot.
Yeah,
so it's the open system.
There won't be a problem. The hardware won't be an issue. I'm not concerned about that.
But Louis, that's if they accept a Wi-Fi based. Those people have stood one up for the French system, haven't they? Which is Wi-Fi based. So as long as hang on, I could be getting this wrong. So this will apply across the whole of the EU, won't it? So therefore, if it works in France,
but I'm sure the French will try to push for theirs. Theirs will also be part, because
it's all part of the ASTM.
Come on, it's the guys that had the yellow headlights. So
don't let the Italians get involved, because it'll break down every 2 weeks.
What's really interesting about the definition of it under Part 6, and it says an remote identification add-on shall comply with the following: ensures in real time during the whole duration of the flight the direct periodic broadcast from the UA using an open and documented transmission protocol of the following data in a way that they can be received directly by existing mobile devices within a broadcasting range. But we don't know what direct periodic broadcast is. That could be one every hour.
That's what I was trying to say. So at the moment, the remote ID is so vague that it can be two servos doing signaling with flags.
You could use LEDs. You could use LEDs, because smartphones have cameras. They can receive the flashes, and it can be periodic. And so, it is pretty broad, isn't it?
Yep. And it's got to be received by a mobile device.
Yeah, you just point the device to the
camera.
The
The ASTM standard is where they're all going with this. And actually, what's interesting when you say on the amount of broadcast time, the US originally put in their documentation that it must be, I think originally once a second. And they've now reduced that substantially because of the concern.
It's going to be concerned with the GPS update rates.
They've dropped it substantially. So, in theory, the European system is going to follow the ASTM standard. Everyone assumes it's going to follow the Wi-Fi Direct. I can't remember what there's a Wi-Fi, an open Wi-Fi policy. That's what the belief is. But sorry.
Go on, you go to your butt.
I was just going to say, but as you say, you can get the standard. It is available at £89. So an open standard, an open and accessible standard that will cost you £89.
It's a one-time fee. Don't act so much, because otherwise they'll start charging you for every flight.
The 18 euros a flight that one particular UTM wants, for instance, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then the UTM that is driving the hardware. This is not the standard they're pushing for. Is the Wi-Fi standard? This has come out of Europe. They're pushing for their LoRa-based proprietary standard, and that's what's got the ear of the ASTM, unfortunately.
I'm surprised that they haven't come up and said, well, we're going to allocate a special piece of spectrum for this, and you have to pay an annual radio license to use that piece of spectrum for your remote ID. Ka-ching, ka-ching. There's all plenty of ways to clip this ticket. I'm sure this is being worked on as we speak.
Don't worry, that will come, because of course, if they had to put them into the ISM bands have their the amount of time you're allowed to transmit for. I can't remember the grown-up word for that. The duty cycle or whatever. And I'm sure a lot of the ISM bands won't have the duty cycle available for the frequency at which they want the updates to happen. Therefore, it will have to be a little bit of protected spectrum, which we'll have to pay for.
In the EU, you got LBT, listen before transmit. So if you've got something on your craft that's already transmitting, it won't be able to send the signal because it'll say, oh, there's no available time slot.
And it's required to comply with that. So actually, if you use 2.4 gig Wi-Fi, your remote ID system may not hardly send any packets at all, because it's going to be actually listening that your radio video system is continuously transmitting on. Because remember, the radio systems are not FHSS; they're fixed frequency, fixed band. They sit there and take up probably 8 channels of the band. So actually,
apply for a bit of spectrum that we're going to sell to all the drone flyers and model aircraft guys. Let's get that application in now.
We'll go to microwaves, guys.
5G.
We'll go to microwaves. And
5G. It'll all be 5G based. That you do remote ID will be 5G based, and then they can charge you the monthly fee that Richard was talking about before.
What's going to be really interesting about how this develops? Sorry, Gary, is that the U-Space EASA's opinion is designed on the premise that it's going to be a competitive environment. So as a drone operator, we should be able to select which one of the several companies that are available there and then that we want to use. And of course, it's all going to be based on price. As a drone operator, you're going to be looking for the smallest cost. And they want to, enhance that level of competition within whatever use space we're going to be working in. But if they're creating barriers and we're using ASTM and we're using other standards, it's going to be up to me to choose which one I want to go for, is the way that it's designed right now. But if I'm limited on choice and I've got a drone job to do, I have no choice. I've got to take that. And it's going to be interesting because I made a comment, I think it was on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, whereby the FAA have chosen a number of companies that they want to have a seat at the table. And when you look through the documentation, the FAA purposely say that other companies will be able to have a seat at the table. This is just a steering group or steering committee that are going to help us work through the challenges of UTM. My question was, well, if all these guys, these big ticket guys, have paid a seat to be at the table, they're hardly going to design a platform that's going to be amenable to all users. There is going to be some integration issues around that to prevent access by these people because they've already spent so much money and they want a return on their investment.
No, it's not return on investment, a return on expenses. So they want their expenses back. So,
Thanks for the correction, Louis. But that fundamentally goes against the whole premise about making it a truly competitive environment, because by putting these people at the table, are we actually going to be in a position, for example, to open up the market? Is it really going to happen that way? And do the American drone pilots, for example, have confidence that the FAA can facilitate that in a way that opens the market to them all?
Well, I'm just thinking, we don't go to different agencies to drive on a motorway, our HGVs and our private cars and all this. We don't contract services to drive around in those dangerous things all over the place. And we have one.
Really not sure. I think the problem will be more with the recreational flyers, because
they can fly in their designated areas, Louis. It's absolutely fine.
No, even when they're becoming serious criminals like this guy, No, the thing is, who is going to need it most? The professionals will have to come up with a system, put up a system in place that will easily allows them to operate. Because most of you perhaps know that most of the industrial commercial flights, the least problem we have is the permission to fly. You get so many requests of paperwork to fly a drone in certain places that permission to fly is just a comma on the entire spectrum of paperwork. The problem is the DJI Mavic Minis, the whatever the drone, the flavor of the month is, that wants to take a picture from a statue. No, statues, no, they're being thrown down. From any kind of monument or a beach or something, they want to do a droning. And those are the peoples that will be chased. And someone will come up with a solution that perhaps it's like the insurance on your app. So you'll do the pay-per flights, I think. The problem will be how much will the pay-per flight cost.
Well, it's okay because Chris iForce 2D is going to make it cheaper, so we'll just sign up for him. He's already entered the world of competitive UTM pricing, and it's going to be cheaper.
He is with this, so iForce 2D is there. So come on, it's a island in the lost in the middle of the ocean. So who cares?
The thing with this is, the more I've looked at this, I don't know how Model RC is going to be able to fly under this. I've just looked at a couple of things. I've just looked at the standard scenarios under the specific category, and it's basically the same as having requirements are close to doing what you need to do as a PFCO with regards to having an operations manual. You have to specify. This change pretty much ends Model RC the way I'm reading it. I could be wrong on this. I'm just glancing through it, and what they say
when I started RC,
outside of zones, that's it. You basically have to apply for a permission. You have to give them written confirmation of how you're going to operate, because they're not. No model aircraft is in the open category. That's it. They can't comply as of today. So they're going to fall under specific. And to do specific, you have to either submit your own paperwork, as Richard said just now, at a nice charge to the CAA, or comply with one of the standard scenarios. But the standard scenarios are virtually the same as applying for a basic PFCO. You even have to have a flight test.
Well, when I started on RC World, I started with helicopters. We were supposed to fly only on the flying fields run by the Model Aircraft Federation. We have a federation that gathers all the clubs that have that. So we were supposed to fly there. And then we all knew about the pirate spots, which were the places that you would gather some enthusiasts of a determined category. For instance, soaring planes or helicopters would go to a certain place and fly there, but always with the cars running to escape from the police if the police would show up. And I think we're back to what it was 30 years ago. It's not
30 years ago. Well, let's go back a bit further. Let's go back 60 years ago when I was entering the hobby. I could go down to the local park. I could go down to the local school, and flying places were accessible to kids, especially, that were getting an interest in the hobby. And remember, already we've got aviation, and model aviation is starting to grey out, or it was until the Chinese foamy models came along. Yeah. And if we restrict the available flying spaces to for our children, to those who are able to get a ride an hour out of the city to the country where there's a little spot, we are going to see the death of the hobby. It's going to be regulated out of existence, because without actually enjoying the hobby at some level, you don't develop a passion for it, and it'll just die. And I think maybe that's actually part of the agenda, because it is so simple. It is so simple for regulators to say,
negative.
This is a model airplane, this is a drone. This has semi-autonomous or autonomous capabilities with the GPS and doesn't require skill to fly. This requires skill, therefore you've got to have the training and the teaching, and you're taught the rules and so forth. This has been a hobby, safe hobby for decades without any threat to national security, without threat to safety, without threat to aviation. This is new. We draw a division and say, model aircraft, you carry on as you always were because the profile of your risk has not changed. Drone operators with your Mavics and your Phantoms, well, okay, you're a different kettle of fish. Now you're causing problems. But because the regulators refuse to draw that distinction, and it's an incredibly simple one. Has it got a GPS? Yes or no? Oh, okay. They can't do that. There is obviously some kind of agenda where they do not wish to draw that distinction for whatever reason, whether it's because they want to tax the model flyers, whether they want to get them out of the airspace because they're an inconvenience for commercial operators. I don't know. But we must be asking this question.
I think we have to make the distinction between the model recreational RC flyers and the drone buy it at Arrows drone in the box. Those are that is the biggest difference. Even now, a couple of minutes ago, I was chatting with some guys about one guy that very proudly bought his Mavic, whatever the latest craze, and went flying over a bridge that is inside the restriction area of the airport. And everybody was saying, "Oh, you're crazy." And the guy says, "Why? Why can I not fly over there? It's open air." So people, even when they know the rules, these guys are guys that are going to have the biggest effect on what we all like to do.
They have had. It's happened.
So Richard, you've slept with the devil. Why do you think they're not drawing the distinction?
Which devil's that?
Regulator. You were a part of CAA, but you're better now. So why do you think they're not bothering to draw this extremely simple distinction?
I think he wrote the regs and left. That's what he did. He wrote the regulations and left. It's his fault.
He brought the model aircraft with him.
Oh dear. What I would, before I go to that point, I did pick up in their FAQs one of the questions that they put, and it says, "Are there any plans to allow current or recently expired PFCO holders or model association members with an appropriate achievement award to be exempt from the requirement to undertake the A2 CFC in order to fly in the A2 subcategory?" The answer is no. A2 subcategory, part of the open category, no oversight by CAA. Therefore, any person operating on the open category must comply with the full requirements of that category.
Yeah.
So, I mean, where they're going with model aircraft. I mean, when I was at the CAA, it was talked about quite a lot. Actually, it isn't dismissed by the CAA as a regulator. The BMFA has got a voice, definitely in the UK. But how powerful is that voice and how much influence they've got today? I couldn't answer that question. I simply don't know.
There is a possibility here, isn't it? Like, all they have to do is present a standard scenario for Model RC. That's all they have to do. There's a very simple answer. They just go, "Here is a standard scenario for Model Fixed Wing." So
that was the standard scenario was one of the points I was going to make to Gary, and it's what's really interesting in their paperwork that they've submitted in CAP 1789 is the fact that they have decided not to implement standard scenarios at all. Now, what's really interesting is when they've caveated the top of the note to say that we won't be implementing this because the effects of Brexit are unknown. And I think the CAA and the DFT have missed a complete opportunity here, because what they could have done was taken these two standard scenarios, adapted them or modified them or make something out of them to show that the UK is a leading authority on this. And that goes back to my earlier point about being a bit bold. They could have put in the standard scenarios. They're not complicated. I mean, the first one is covers VLOS operations over controlled ground area in a populated environment and required a Class C5 UAS, or covers BVLOS operations with airspace observers, so essentially EVLOS, over controlled ground area in a sparsely populated environment. So we could have easily adapted these, but just to say because of Brexit, no, we're not doing it, I think was, playing a get out of jail free card. And what's really, really interesting is at the bottom of that piece where they have the caveat at the top say we're not having it. At the bottom, the first standard scenarios will not become applicable until the 2nd of December 2021. Right, so that's where they'll be in terms of EASA. That could mean that on the 1st of January, we come in with, say, 3, 4, or 5 standard scenarios. We're already ahead of the EU by a year. And we haven't taken that decision. We've now got.
You've been here before, Richard, and you seem to be forgetting. You've forgotten one of the basic rules, haven't you? You've forgotten that common sense.
Common sense is banned here.
Yeah.
Banned in this industry. Banned here. Yeah.
Common sense is not common.
No. That's a kind of annoying phrase, that, isn't it? But it is.
Speaking to this, isn't one of the problems we've got that every regulator wants to be the best. They always want to be leading the field. They think they're world leading in their regulation, and everyone else will fall behind them, which is why we have zero consistency across jurisdictions, and everybody's different. America's different to Canada, to the UK. Surely the problem is that people are doing their own thing. We've got the same risks everywhere because the laws of physics still apply, the laws of aerodynamics still apply. We're all flying the same aircraft, we're all flying the same drones. So surely the regulations should be consistent.
Yeah, and I would like to say that it could be, because we operate in a Commonwealth law jurisdiction. How many Commonwealth countries adopt our legal framework? Loads. I mean, I don't know how many Commonwealth countries there are, I'm embarrassed to say, but there are many. And we've got it now. I'm sure somebody's going to Google it, or I should say ask Alexa, and somebody's Alexa will pipe up now, like it did before.
Hey Siri, how many countries in Commonwealth?
None now, Louis.
Hey
There
Siri.
is no Commonwealth.
Hey Siri, phone mum. Trying to get his phone to go off.
Siri, read out my last text message.
Yeah. Hey Siri, what was that picture again? No, it's mad. There is common sense. That just makes me feel very old. Saying it seems that it's not anywhere. And it's all right. Let's turn the coin for being pro UTMs or the system. Is the case really not that the air traffic system, the current manned air traffic system, is so out of date that it needs to be brought up the bootstraps? And unfortunately, I can definitely see UTM providers providing services that conventional air traffic management services cannot do. Just look at Altitude Angel with their Inmarsat link now. So they've got aircraft data from the entire planet. There's no air traffic management system that can buy that in. So that sort of technology, they are going to leapfrog the traditional server. Oh, look out, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, live from his Mediterranean shed.
We've been hijacked. Is this Zoom? Is this a Chinese person trying to break in on a conference?
Yeah, that's what Zoom bombed. And we've been Zoom bombed or something, whatever it's called. Ian,
I thought he'd been arrested.
You're right, he has been electrocuted by the look of him.
I've got a lockdown haircut, that's for certain. Self-cut.
Yeah, I've got lockdown.
I was just extolling the virtues of UTM, but Ian, I don't know if you remember, Richard, but Ian's put in loads of Freedom of Information Act requests for Gatwick. We'll jump back to Gatwick now, easier, because Ian he can only talk about Gatwick. That's all he can talk about. But
Hi,
Richard's got the complaints lot involved for one of his. I can't remember the grown-up words. Richard, remind me of the grown-up words.
Information Commissioner's Office.
Is that for the Sussex Police?
Yeah.
Is yours the one where they've done a ruling on, or is yours a different one?
I've already got a ruling on it. They've made a declaration.
Oh, yours will be the one I've seen where the ruling is they've said Sussex Police, have failed and should have replied.
That's right.
They're just blanket not replying, full stop, period. Unless you ask me something like Gary asked, which is how much did it cost? I don't mind saying that, but if you ask anything of just facts about what happened, even stuff that should be in the public domain, they don't know.
That's my one, and it's currently sitting with the ICO solicitors at the moment.
You see, there's loads of people that haven't had them replied to. It's a shame we can't do some sort of equivalent of a class action, isn't it? Of everyone saying, "Wait a minute, mine's not being answered." So I'll take it. Everyone has to escalate. Well, we'll have to escalate individually. I'm going to do that with mine now, actually, because I was being really I was like, "Oh well, just forget it. You're not going to get a reply." But when I saw your thing, I thought, "Sorry, it's time for some other people to pile in."
Yeah, absolutely.
If there's only someone you could meet and talk to, Ian, that would have that sort of knowledge of how to do that sort of a thing, maybe it'd make it easier for you. If only there was some way of connecting you with someone that knew how to do it. If only there was. Yeah, I mean, our ones, I can't remember the ones we've got, but the thing is, we've got so many flipping Freedom of Information Act requests in America and Australia for stories for SES News. We've got so I forget all the ones I haven't been flipping replied to. I suppose an organised person would have a folder or something, but they are very easy to be forgotten. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a shame more drone users don't put them in, actually, because at least the process here in the UK, especially with the What Do They Know website, it's a very easy process, as you've shown on one of your previous videos.
Well, you made it.
Yeah, it's probably something you want to sort of push again in future. Try and get a few more people doing it, because there's certainly lots of questions to ask. It's just getting them answered.
Well, that reporter's reached out to you and I this week, so, and obviously as a result of, in fact, we need to put her in touch with Richard as well, actually.
Yes.
Which we'll do. I'll do that.
Sure.
They're looking at it again, and really, and the 55k, as it turned out, that wasn't enough money, and there's actually, other than Richard having his collar felt and all the other stuff, there's so many unanswered questions and so much bull dust that happened at that time that's gone into folklore and obscurity now, and it does need to be raked up and gone over again, because the entire world has felt the effects of the Battle of Gatwick in one way or another. It's been held up as an example of badness that could happen with zero evidence. Rant ends. You can rant now, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I was just a quick point. When I look through what the House of Lords have been speaking about in relation to the drone bill, you'd be surprised the amount of times the reference to Gatwick has come up. And when I pointed out to members of the House of Lords, well, there's actually been no evidence of any drone there. And subsequently, in the latest article that Sussex Police published, they declared that the sightings may have been their own drone sightings. Well, hang on a minute. I'm sure I remember 67 was a really good number of drone sighting reports around that time. But the problem is getting that kind of information to the House of Lords as lawmakers now debating the bill and how they can change it before it goes to the House of Commons is incredibly important. And I would certainly commend anybody to write to them on the website, work out one of the House of Lords or your MP or whatever the case may be, write to either or both and tell them that the drone bill is not fit for purpose. Because now is the time that we can actually influence that law.
Okay. Well, then that's what we must do.
Yeah, I've written a letter and I've put it out on LinkedIn that anybody can just copy and paste and send it. Maybe we could do something, Gary, that we can put it out to. I don't know, or something like that.
I'm not on Facebook for grown-ups, so I can't copy and paste it.
Oh no, said Henry's cat.
It's been removed.
That's something that should be on the Bruce's Facebook group. Should be there.
That's true. Yeah,
it'd be worth you putting a story on that, Gary, and then it can go out and people can follow it. I mean, if there's a letter already that can be used as a template, I'll encourage people to think, actually, this is not too difficult to do, and they've got an explanation of where to go and submit that. I mean, we know from previous exercises along this line, not half as many people do speak up as should do, but everyone helps, and especially if you go to the commercial groups, you might get a little bit more of a willingness, maybe.
Yeah,
I think one of your freedom of information requests, if I remember correctly, got every mention of different names going back and forth between the CAA and
I've been sort of querying and trying to see emails, and I've just done a variety of things that pop into my mind. To be honest, I've not done enough for what the questions need asking. But it's just trying to get a feel for what some issues may be, or just trying to dig a bit deeper. Certainly on Gatwick, there's a few things that, even if you get some stuff that's redacted, at least if people be a little more open. At the moment, there just seems to be, even outside the police, if you go to like Department of Transport or whatever, or I think even with the CAA, you start mentioning Gatwick, and suddenly nobody wants to even reply in it at all. It's any excuse, and it's usually the one, this would take far too much time, even though it's just a search onto your email domain, especially if you just want email.
I still want to see the SATCO's log. I still want to see the air traffic log for that night. I want to see what was actually put in the log, because that's a super duper legal document. Anything that's put in there.
Obviously, there'll be no chance in hell of you getting that, but
no, there isn't.
Yeah.
There isn't. But that would tell us all the answers really, and that would put in order the events, and because we've got to remember this all started on a windy, rainy, horrible night. As someone that lived or was working in the Gatwick area would know at that sort of a time. It started from nonsense. It started on a poor premise. None of the services moved that they suggested moved. When you look into it, none of the special forces jumped into their vans and rushed across. So, and none of the Air Force's special aircraft were launched. If there were some of the threats that people were suggesting, so it was just, it was nonsense. I missed the shirt then.
Airborne Forces. It was the 65th anniversary when I was there at Arnhem as a paratrooper.
Oh, okay. Oh,
we mentioned Special Forces, so I jumped.
Yeah. Because Special Forces, are they all that special? Anyway,
I'd like to think we are.
Yeah, no, I know. I've done the VNS, I've done the Nijmegen March. But to the because it was at the time they were sort of generating a narrative around Special Forces left their barracks and this, that, and the other. And then when you look at it, they didn't. So those people might have left, and various very special people might have left things, and the very fact that they didn't leave what the places they would have left indicates that it really wasn't it was serious, but it wasn't. Oh no, we better not. That's if you call them, then you are in trouble, and somebody will want to know why they're not having a cup of tea where they live if they get dispatched. So to not dispatch those people means it wasn't as serious as you were suggesting it was. To me, anyway. I'm ranting. I'll let Ian. Ian's a special guest. We better let Ian have a long rant about this.
To be honest, I haven't come on with specifically much to say. I just saw you were all on. It's been a while. I just happened to be here at my PC because I was doing some work late. So I just thought it would be courtesy to drop by. And there's also obviously some interesting topics as well today. And I've not seen Richard on here before, and it's good to actually have a drone lawyer on, someone with the legal expertise. Are you actually on Twitter and vocal on these topics? Because the only person I tend to see, obviously, is DJI's Brendan, but I didn't really realise we had somebody here in the UK that was vocal on these topics.
Oh well, I'm glad to see that I do exist. I am here. Blackiston's Law is what I operate on Twitter.
I think
Gary can put it out.
I've definitely seen you. In fact, I might even be following you, but I shall see. But yeah, that's good. It's very interesting that it was your freedom of information that got to the ICO. It's good that you've progressed. That knowing.
But did you realise that they felt his collar? He was one of the persons of interest.
One of the 97.
Richard's ex Civil Aviation Authority lawyer who happens to live in the Gatwick with a PFCO, happens to live in the Gatwick area because he works for the CAA or did work for the CAA.
Yeah.
I take it that was all very polite though with the PIF codes, was it, when the police came round?
Well, it was quite interesting. So I was driving home at the time, and it was late. It was late afternoon, and this detective inspector phoned me up and said, "Gatwick drones." I said yes. He said, "Are you Richard Ryan?" I said yes. He said, "We want you to come in for a face-to-face interview." I said, "Oh, right, okay." I said, "Well, call me back tomorrow, and we'll see where we can take this." He said, "No, I'll call you back in a couple of hours." I said, "No, you'll call me back tomorrow." Right? So in the morning, bang on 9 o'clock, PC Flip Flop phones me up. Says, we want you to come in. We want you to come in for a face-to-face interview because you spoke to Detective Inspector yesterday and agreed that you do it. I said, "Oh, I didn't make that agreement at all." And I said, "On reflection, I think it's probably a complete waste of my time and a complete waste of your time." He said, "No, we still want you to come in for a face-to-face interview." I said, "Look, let me put it this way. I'm a barrister. I advise on drone law. I used to work for Civil Aviation Authority. I have a PFCO. It's highly unlikely it's going to be somebody like me that's flying drones around Gatwick." He said, "No, but we still want you to come in for a face-to-face interview." I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." I said, because as I've explained, I think it's a complete waste of my time and your time. And I think what should be happening, this conversation should be running along the lines of, "Oh, we consider you to be quite knowledgeable. How can you help us with our investigation?" But of course, he didn't take that. But what he did say was, "I'd feed that back." And I never heard from them since. But they did put a note through my door, and they had called at my door when I was out. And so that was how I found out that I was a person of interest. So they had my mobile number. They had the knowledge of the fact that I had drones and I lived near Gatwick Airport. And what was really quite funny, and I did a number of radio interviews at the time, actually. When I drive around Gatwick, it was just absolutely chocker with police cars. And at night as well, they're all sitting in their police cars looking for drones, apparently, at night around the airport. And I said, if I'm going to be flying a drone in Gatwick Airport, do you honestly think I'm going to be on the road outside the perimeter fence, flying it over the fence and around the airport? Do you think would anybody be that close in terms of proximity if they're going to try and disrupt an airport in the event that they're going to get easily captured? It's highly unlikely. You know, knowing what we know about range, I'd probably be 2 or 3, 4K away with my Phantom or whatever it's going to be in a wood somewhere flying it. And then we've just spent hundreds of thousands of pounds with police knocking up the overtime because they've decided to put a visible presence around the airport, which is highly unlikely that you'd see a drone operator there anyway. So yeah, the fact that I got hooked, and then I was driving around thinking, what the hell are these guys doing? Was quite insightful. And and what really came out that was interesting for me in the article lately, in relation to their disclosure, is that they said they've learned a number of lessons and they've changed their protocols. So Ian, my next FOI to
what's the protocol?
What protocols have you changed?
So Richard, do you think they knew you were a barrister before? You don't think they knew that?
No, I don't think they did.
They surely just use the PIFCO database, and that wouldn't record your occupation or anything on there. It'd just be your
maybe
address.
But if they had access to that database, I would really want to know about it, because then we've got potentially issues of sharing data without my permission.
But you're registered as a commercial operator, because I could find commercial operators directly on the CAA websites.
Yeah,
they do that too. You can do that too, but normally it only gives you company name. It doesn't give you a person's name or their phone number. Or
some people are registered as person.
Yes.
Some are. That's right, but I wasn't.
So Richard is Blakestown law.
So you're the one person, perhaps, the only person of those 90 odd people, I think you said there were persons of interest that had the nuts and the knowledge to say, well, actually, no, because you know the ins and outs. If they'd called me, even here, and I'm in South Africa, and I would have guy in the car driven up and gone because it's the police calling, and they've called me in. So now that this couple have been awarded their money for the terrible time, their tiny not enough amount of money for the terrible time, those 90 odd other people that have had that, including yourself, surely there's some money in it for you now, isn't it? Why were they ringing you? Isn't there something?
Well, Gary, they were unlawfully detained. And unlawfully arrested, which is the premise of the claim against them. I actually, at the time, did phone up the police station and offered my legal services pro bono to give Mr. and Mrs. Gates some legal advice. And I was told, I got put through to the custody suite at the police station, and they said, no, you need to speak to such and such person in order to be an approved legal representative to come down here and represent them. I said, okay, tell me who that is and I'll make the call. Sorry, I can't tell you, that's confidential.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Sorry.
I mean, I really couldn't make it up, honestly. So, I really felt for those guys that got arrested. It was such a tragedy, really was.
Who represented them, I wonder?
Come on, Richard, you were just looking for a share of that $145,000 as a lawyer, weren't you?
No, I think the law firm was Howard Kennedy, but I may be corrected on that. That probably represents them in their dispute against unlawful detention and unlawful arrest.
Yeah.
I don't know who represented them at the police station. So it might have been them. I just don't know, and I couldn't tell you because I have no knowledge of that.
So just remind me again, very thick, what made it unlawful, the detention?
Well, it was the whole premise that they were the people responsible for the Gatwick drone incident, and there was absolutely no evidence to substantiate the basis of which they were arrested. So it would have been on suspicion of, you are now arrested, I would imagine, for flying drones, in contravention of the A&O and whatever else it's going to be, right?
Stuff, and why 36 hours? Why were they held for? This should have been. You got a phone call, Richard. Why did you get a phone call saying, "Can you come and have a chat?" Okay. Yeah. Whereas they got their doors kicked in, arrested, and
material confiscated.
It's really interesting. I mean, I don't know what.
And why 36 hours? Why wasn't it a trip down the police station? Who are you? Let's talk about this. Okay, we don't think they've told us the truth. Why? Well, what made them different? Because it's wrong.
It says a call was made to the police by neighbours, so that's different. It's a report, and
they're acting on intelligence.
For the way I heard it, and obviously I can't say that this. I can't back it up factually, so we'll put it as speculation. But the way I'd heard it, there was kind of some ill feeling with another neighbour, and it was that neighbour that had dogged him in. So they might have well embellished it. I mean, the way the press presented it was they had been recently flying a drone, when his own Facebook proved that in fact he'd sold his drones ages ago. So that suggests that they've had information that was embellished. And that reminds me of like in the US where you got the thing called swatting, where the people that have grudges against other people, call in a report to the police, say there's someone armed on the premise, the SWAT team go around and end up shooting them. And I think here the armed police have gone in, and that's a genuine risk there that someone ends up getting shot in the house and they're completely innocent.
It's funny you say about the Facebook thing, because at the time when this all kicked off, I was helping run some Facebook groups, and obviously this was a very big subject across the world. And one of the things I was concerned about was them. But what was very apparent quick, anyone who was in the industry looked at them, he'd posted online, and you instantly went, this is one of us. This is just a member of the community. This isn't, it wasn't how do I defeat NFZs? It wasn't things like that. Within 5 minutes, you looked at the person's previous posting on forums and Facebook and just went, this is just a normal guy. No, this wasn't right. And it was instant. You could see it instantly that this just didn't make sense.
Yeah, let's be fair and honest about this, if somebody went out to disrupt an airport with an unmanned aircraft, they would have succeeded, done the job, and that would have been that. There's no, if you were serious, you would have done the job. So that to me says there was no job.
You don't even pilot it. It's autonomous. You just put it in the field, walk off, get back in the car, and let it do its thing. It's
yeah.
And by the way, I could do it from here. Because
exactly.
From Portugal, I can just remote desktop to a computer somewhere near Gatwick and operate the drone from here. Easy peasy.
That would be illegal. That'd be beyond visual line of sight.
Well, that's why we need a UTM, you see, so that we can get the
we could track it.
Get all the flight done.
That was, and I have often wondered why them. Okay, it does make a bit of sense if there was a neighbour twisting it. I saw this guy go out. I saw this guy. It only takes a couple of things, doesn't it? He was out at that night. He came back late, and I saw him take something out the car. It's all it takes is that embellishment, and suddenly,
what's that US motto? What's that US motto? If you see it, report it, or something like that.
I'm more interested, Gary. Richard has already said he was driving around late at night at the time that this was happening. He's already said
woods 4 kilometers. He said it all. Yeah, he said it all. Oh, yeah.
But no, it was a. I've always felt from day one, and I think I mentioned it earlier, that I've tried to. I spoke about it the other day on the channel and try and keep their faces out of it. I hope they can get something out of the press. I don't think they will, because the headline was shocking. It's a shame the BBC, actually, I'm a bit peeved with the BBC, didn't need to run with that photo again. They didn't need to put their photo on the header of it and give them more press when it was unnecessary, when they've been deemed innocent. So why has the BBC put that photo again of them outside the house? It wasn't necessary.
They're opening themselves up to be liable for another trial. So I think that's the common what goes on in UK these days. So the press does something wrong, and you jump on them, and they pay you a couple of thousand, and off you go.
It doesn't seem like a lot of money to walk away with, though.
55 grand's nothing, is it?
No, that's the money they got from the government, from what I understand. Now they can go after the media that publish their photos easily.
I don't
55
know.
grand.
You had a lawyer handy that could tell us whether publishing a photo is a reason to go after someone.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that kind of area of law, but what I would say is, don't forget they did come out and do a press conference where there was lots of media that took lots of pictures. So once you've done that, consent is already there.
And also the media reporting the facts that they've been arrested on suspicion. So you can't defame somebody with the facts unless you represent them in a way that skews their real meaning. So I don't think they have a case against the media.
I think there was a slight one with the newspaper with the question mark, wasn't there? So something like, are these the morons that destroyed Christmas? Where really it's trying to imply these are the ones, because that's what then caused the likes of Piers Morgan to tweet on it, which then he later on apologised and deleted his tweet once they were shown to
shock.
But there is the movement to stop that whole use of the question mark, isn't there? And that sort of headline. That's another.
Is there?
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole another.
All I hope is they can get on with their lives. That's all I hope.
My great concern is where is this going to go when the drone bill hits with the increased police powers, and it's also. What they've done in the police powers is given the police or given us as operators the opportunity of presenting our documentation on a 7-day wonder to any police station we like. Now I live up in Scotland, and I could go to a really small police station and say, "There's my paperwork," and they're going to look at me and say, "Well, what's this for?" "Oh, I was told to bring it to the police station." "Yeah, but what is it?" "It's my paperwork." "Yeah, but what for?" "For my drones." "Well, why are you giving it to me?" "Well, because the drone bill says I have to." "Well, I don't know what that paperwork should be." But the premise of the drone bill is that every police officer in the whole UK should know what it should be. So if you get told to present your paperwork to a police station, they should know what exactly that is. But it's not prescribed in the drone bill.
No.
Yeah.
I think the only hope we have, the only hope we have is to become transgender or change race.
Oh no! Oh no!
Bruce,
So
if you
Gary,
had the
is there any other news?
Do you remember there used to be this guy who was on YouTube years ago? He was a great guy, wasn't he? It's a shame it ended so quickly. It was just under the influence.
It's the dementia. It's the dementia. Don't worry.
It's the medication.
The knock-on effects of all of this and the citing of Gatwick, and there will continue to be cited in reports and studies, and this is why you need to pay me $1 bajillion for our counter drone equipment. It'll keep being pulled out of a rabbit out of a hat continually now. So the damage, I mean, the BMFA, all the commercial drone body over there, the name of which I've forgotten. They come to the table and say, "Hey, what about all the damage to our industry? Come on, pay us some money."
This is an ongoing thing. Richard can perhaps explain why it is that the regulators, the CIA, seem to turn a blind eye to the science and the data points we've already got that show that these rules are unjustified. I mean, you probably saw that video from Poland with the Russian biplane. They flew into a drone, completely smattered it into a million pieces, no damage to the plane. And they showed how effectively a large propeller was a great screen against drones coming through into the cockpit. I mean, all these things and all the numerous growing number of incident reports where drones bounce off or just cause very little damage to aircraft. The regulators just seem to they discount those. But they don't have any evidence on the other side to prove that these risks are very real. So why aren't they doing their homework, Richard?
Is just making sense. So we have to exclude this side of the screen from the
that's common sense.
Yeah, guys, that makes sense. This and this, that makes sense. So sorry, you're excluded.
I probably have to pre-excuse Richard, because I have a feeling you've got to make the definition between regulators and then political interference of regulators. I have a feeling you might find that they are paying more attention, but then their political overlords jump up and down on them. But anyway, I'll let
we are easily forgetting the key factor that makes everything move.
Money.
Just follow the trace of the money.
Yeah, like let's just say you wanted to push through some drone regulation. How hard was it to make a quick phone call just to say, I've seen a drone near an airport, and suddenly it becomes hearsay, becomes total fact, and every report ever since refers to it as fact, and government use it in their own paperwork as fact. Reality is, might have cost 800 grand, might cost £1 million. It was probably a cheap way of getting what they wanted.
So let's go after the money.
Where the motivation is behind that story and everything else is a question I think that's going to be asked for many years to come, because without evidence, what do we have? Just speculation, and that is it. In relation to Bruce's question, I think it is a real balance between the political masters and what the regulator has to do. There's some really, really good people at the regulator, who are really doing the best that they can do. But sometimes regulators are doing the job with one hand tied behind their back, and I think that also has to be recognised, because of it could be political pressure, it could be public perception, it could be just to win a couple of extra votes. We just don't know what the true extent of the pressure is on a regulator to perform. But that still doesn't remove the fact that the regulator's got to be capable as the competent authority to be able to determine what regulations should be in place and when. And what they do have to do is advise the political masters accordingly to make sure that what the political masters want isn't compatible with what is good law or good regulation in a way that facilitates drone use. Obviously, the regulator's coming at it from a purely safety perspective, which is absolutely right. We wouldn't want them to do anything else but come at it from a safety perspective. And the political masters are coming at it from, let's increase the economy in a business perspective. And I would say more so now than ever because of the way that the economy is. And, every country's facing a recession and God knows what else. But I think trying to get that balance right can sometimes be difficult. But I think, as I said earlier, we've got to make some real bold decisions here in the UK to push this forward. And I don't think that we have the people in place to be able to do that.
When you say political masters in the UK context, is that Department of Transport?
Yeah, it would be to an extent, Ian. That's absolutely right. So the Department of Transport are the ones that ultimately talk about where we're going in terms of regulation. And they are, the CAA is responsible to the DFT. But I'm also talking about, those members of Parliament and those members of the House of Lords that are taking a salary from us, the taxpayer, who have a duty to make sure that what they put in place is good law. But they only do that on advice from the government. So the law is drafted by government lawyers who probably don't fly drones, who haven't flown drones. So it starts to become circular because they will then go to the DFT. The DFT will then go to the CAA, and then it continues. And that's what we're looking at. And somewhere in that circular transmission of information, things get lost in translation. Or people don't pick up different things, or people have different experiences, or people view risk differently, or they view the law being applied in a different way. And those are the challenges that we've got to get through. And some of what we do around formulating policy through sandbox BV loss trials, looking in other jurisdictions, should be helping us make much better law. But also the fact that we're leaving EASA gives the UK a fantastic opportunity to take the lead. We could end up taking drone companies out of the continent, and they start investing in the UK because we have a much more flexible regime to facilitate that.
It will be a bit hard because, as you know, most of the European drone development that happens these days is around Switzerland, Zurich. Because not only of the university, not only for the university, but also because Swiss laws are very easy to comply to.
Sure.
That is one issue that they have. So you'll have to gather a series of preconditions to enhance that hub of technology.
The UK has to copy Switzerland, surely. Let's just see what Switzerland does and do it better.
I agree with you what you said, Richard. You're absolutely spot on. It's something I know I've said it in the past because I was involved with Bradford's bid with Nesta.
Okay.
And I said that really the legislation is really it's the barrier, and it's not only the legislation we've got written down that's hard and fast. It's the fact that you've got your councils then coming up with their own changes and policies that are considerably more strict and they're based purely on misinformation and fear. I think it's going to hold the drone industry back decades. And I think it's so unfortunate that no one higher up that has the ability to change it really sees that and appreciates it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot. There are a lot of great organisations in this country. Look at the Future Flight Programme and the people that are getting involved in that. In the UK, that want to do some real good work. But it's not an easy environment to do that in. I think is the point here. The CAA sandbox is a CAA sandbox, but I have had no personal experience of the guys in the CAA sandbox, so I can't comment to that. But the questions that I will ask is, from my experience at CAA, how effective are they actually in doing what they do? It'd be really useful to understand how they are affecting or influencing potential regulation through what it is that they're seeing. But the sandbox is a place where people can go and grow in a controlled environment, or because it's in a box, and it's trying to understand what they're doing and what they're learning from that so that we can form the policy. But we just don't have to look into our own countries. What I'm saying, there's so many examples now around the globe that have gone through these processes. The NASA TCL programs were really interesting. Some of the results they put out were really interesting. I mean, some of the latency issues around their UTM piece and what they were doing was really dressed up, and I think was very weak in terms of their output. But that's a lesson that we've all learned from that, or we could all learn from it.
Sure. Yeah. You just choose how to read the reports, isn't it? Really. Read around what's actually being said.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If other people are paying the bill to, develop and innovate, let's get involved and let's set up that network to learn from it. That's what we should be doing. And we as a Commonwealth jurisdiction can also benefit from it by pushing out what we do and develop in terms of our legal framework to the rest of the Commonwealth, because they have the similar legal framework. And then straight away we've taken over half the world in terms of leading drone legislation.
Not this week,
including New Zealand.
And South Africa. It'd be fantastic if we had the UK regs here, actually, because our regs are shocking, really, really, really shocking. But there we are. And on that note, I think, because we've nearly gone 2 hours here, what other topics did we have to come up with, gentlemen, before we run away? Does anyone else see any?
I've seen that special motorcycle flying in Dubai.
Sort of motorcyclist Splendor.
He should never have switched into rape mode. He should have stayed in angle mode. Just terrible,
What I loved was at the top of the climb when he thought he had it under control. Was hooray! It's under.
I'm still trying to understand why he didn't get sliced like a ham.
Yeah.
With those propellers rotating.
I think that has
even big drones are safe.
Notification of panic, or to actually tell the other people there that something was going wrong. Actually,
that thing needs a jet-powered ejection seat.
It looks like a bit of a vibration sort of runaway to me. I don't know what you thought it might have been.
It looks like someone messed up with the test.
Might have been using Beta Flight 4, right?
Yeah.
Beta Flight 4 has trouble flyaways,
I'm going to be honest. No danger money in the world will get me on anything like that. I don't know why that guy is doing that. No matter how much money. He's obviously not flown a drone in the past and seen a flyaway, because if he had, he'd be like, not a chance.
I'm not so sure, because if you try to fly inside a virtual cockpit, it's quite different when you fly FPV. You're trying to fly on a virtual cockpit. And when you move to the real thing, it might get a bit scarier. It's not sitting in the ground with your radio control and playing with sticks. It is a completely different topic.
I should have hired that guy from Sweden. The guy from Sweden that started with the petrol motors and then moved up to the sort of big, all the Kevlar rigging and things in the little wings with the 10-energy batteries. He did a really good job, that guy.
And then he hacked. He cut up a load of radios, didn't he? And he hacked all the radios together as well to make the controls. But he did it incrementally. But I've never seen that thing flying out of ground effect before. It's the first time I've ever seen it climb up. All the videos I've seen of it before, it's only been like 5 feet above the ground and going flat out. No. So I think that.
What I think it's strange is I usually see those crazy YouTube videos on a 2x speed up, and the first time I saw it, let me go back and see this at normal speed, because the takeoff was so fast that I think I had the 2x engaged and it wasn't. So it is crazy the speed it goes up. And then why is it going up so fast to get out of ground effect? But with those small propellers, will the effect be enough?
That never happened on the 3D render.
No. I think the AI engine got messed up while mining some Bitcoin.
Bitcoin stuck in one of the propellers.
No. The AI messed up the Bitcoin rendering farm.
It's strangely ironic that that guy can do that, and that's all fine. And you've got those poor lads in Australia that did the fishing with their drone, and they're in a lot of bother. But I tell you, which two look the safer.
It depends on who's backing up your projects.
CASA has been really harsh in terms of enforcing their regulations. I had so many emails from people in Australia saying, I got a $1,050 fine for doing this or doing that, doing the other. It's like, what are they doing? Haven't they got something better to do? And I think what's happening is with the slowdown in regulation, a slowdown in what the CV19 thing, the malware, that has caused a complete halt in aviation around the world. And like, for example, I think most regulators, certainly here in New Zealand, CAA gets most of its revenue from tariffs on commercial flights. They pay so much per flight and so much for this. So they've lost all their revenues overnight, and they've got nothing to do. So they sit there looking for reasons to ping people with fines. And it's just keeping the revenue going so they keep their jobs up.
They get people working at home and watching YouTube. After a while of seeing drones flying, you get all the drones doing naughty things.
And hopefully they watch through and watch the videos. They don't sort of, download the video and use that as evidence. Hopefully they watch it every time, so these poor people, again, at least getting the ad revenue to pay the fine. One
it's a breach of YouTube.
You're assuming two things: that they are able to download the videos from YouTube.
Oh yes,
that is a very risky, and that they'll know how to transfer the video from wherever that app stores it to a USB pen. So it's the very dangerous approaches.
It's a breach of YouTube's terms and conditions to download a video, so they could lose their YouTube account.
Shame, man. So what else did we see this week? Well, funny enough, I've forgotten the name of the people. That little manned one that we had that chap on that had flown it. They gave up. The Google people gave up with their motorcycle-sized one, didn't they? They pulled out of building those things. What else did I see? I don't really think I saw anything else.
Google Wing is going to be delivering something in the USA, some school books or something. I don't know what it was.
Library books.
Oh, gosh. If only we could invent some sort of digital service that would allow you to sit at home. We could electronically.
No. I think it makes all the sense. Sorry, guys. It makes all the sense because they don't have a Kindle. So instead of coming up with a Kindle, they just deliver the books. Then it gets very well on a PowerPoint web. So
never underestimate the bandwidth of a drone with a bag of books under it.
Absolutely. Well. Yes. I mean, here, not about 10 years ago now, we were some people that had a dispute with our national internet service provider, our telco, did deliver a data stick via a pigeon to Pietermaritzburg to demonstrate that you would get a USB stick's worth of data to Maritzburg faster by pigeon than using our internet. So that was done. Yeah.
I might put in an order for an Encyclopedia Britannica or War and Peace and see if it can deliver that.
Or the Harry Potter box. Oh no, you can't do that now because of what J.K. Rowling said.
Why? Now I don't know this one.
Oh my God! Don't get there. Don't get there.
Okay.
The world has gone mad, Gary. The world has gone mad. You can't do anything without getting in trouble these days. I should know.
Yes. So is there any news, Bruce, on your impending imprisonment? Because we all want to make a video on it.
The 1 week investigation now rolls into its 4th week, and I've had a lot of people contact me that have been in a similar situation here in New Zealand. They've been investigated by the CIA because of videos on YouTube, and they all seem to have a very quick resolution to their cases. So I don't know why mine's taking so long. They can't find a piece of rope long enough or something. I don't know.
It's nothing to do with they know who you are.
Stone him.
No. Let's get something for Bruce. It's like a canary sign. If Bruce does not do something within X amount of time, we know that he has been arrested and he's in jail serving time. So we need Bruce to come up with some kind of dead man switch for Bruce.
Well, it's very difficult though for CIA because if they honestly believe I broke the regulations, then they need to take some kind of enforcement action. But then I always pitch myself, and other people acknowledge that I'm the safety guy. I believe in safety through knowledge. And so I'm out there pitching the thing, don't endanger people, don't endanger their property. If they would take issue with me and ping me with a fine or something, that's not going to enhance their image and their connection with the community they're trying to control. So it becomes difficult for them. And if they don't think I did anything, then they have run the risk that whoever complains is going to say, oh, he got away with stuff. We can't get away with that. CAA's not doing their job. So they're between a rock and a hard place, really. I feel for them.
No, but are they trying to improve their image, Bruce? I'm not so sure. Because they couldn't care less about their image.
Oh, yeah, but it's important. If you want to influence people, you've got to have images. Very important. I'm sure they've got stylists there and image makers and spin doctors designed to make sure the image of the CAA is held in high regard, because if people don't respect you, they don't follow your regulations.
No, they can just say, look, an elderly man was so bad on this that we had no pity of him and we jailed him.
But then what we'll do is we'll start up like a GoFundMe or something like that, and people can buy candles, and we can all light candles in support of Bruce all around the place, and I'll only take a very, very small commission on the candle sales.
Even better. We do a worldwide campaign that every day at 9 o'clock we come out to the window and clap.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's something like that. And I'll only charge a small fee for your official entry into that, because obviously
I reiterate my statement. The world has gone mad.
I thought the Top Gear rule applied. I thought the Top Gear rule applied that if something happens to one of us, you just say nothing, don't acknowledge it, and just as if he was never here. It was as if it just never happened at all.
All right then. So we've agreed now. It's the Top Gear rules.
It's the Top Gear rule, isn't it?
The reason I mentioned the GoFundMe there is slightly in jest, and this is a very off topic, but sadly an F-15 went down yesterday in the UK. They haven't found the pilot. But somebody almost instantly started a GoFundMe to raise money for, and then when somebody said, what for? Oh, for like a memorial by the coast. It's like, my goodness me, you ambulance chasing shyster. It's just
you can't put memorials up for certain classes of people anymore. Only a certain, they'll tear it down.
Oh my God! Don't go there, Bruce. We'll get blocked on the YouTubes.
But the moral sort of vacuousness of trying to put money in your pocket for someone's death,
because it will be, we can. It's 999% admin fee to get this all set up, and 69 pence goes to the flower arrangement, and
that's how my candles for Bruce system will work. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how that will work. Exactly. And Gary Brown's here to give Ian a wave, some moral support for Ian in his tropical garden.
Yes, it's nice to see him out of it.
How's the bamboo going, Ian? There, how's the current LED? When you switch your LEDs on now, I mean, I know there are low power and all that, but you seem to have so many that it might well cause a little bit of a drop in the local grid.
Yeah, I've got 600 watts of power feeding my LED.
And I think I saw you were working on a bar, weren't you, at the minute, or something like that?
Well, it's kind of outside a kitchen-y thing, so it's like for serving up barbecue and doing the food prep. So that's my I've been getting into using stainless steel along with timber, so it's quite easy to work with.
You can see your garden from space, I believe now.
Yes, I bet you can. I did actually catch. Could be just complete coincidence, but when I did pull lights on time, the police helicopter above just stopped for a while and paused.
So you don't actually have a gas burner or anything?
Probably thinking, that's got to be a drug dealer, surely, with all that.
So you don't use fire, you just put the food under the lights and it's cooked in 3 minutes.
Yeah. It's no point Ian making a bar. He doesn't drink proper beer anyway. It's like, I've seen what you post. That's not beer, Ian.
No, I mean, well, I do drink. Mainly vodka's my thing. So, but I've been trying to do less of that because vodka ends up eventually with a long Facebook argument that goes on to 8 a.m. in the morning, or even worse on Twitter.
I thought you were putting in a gin bar when I was looking at it. That's what it was looking like.
It's all the fashion here. We've definitely gone into off-topic mode. Lovely to see you, Ian. And thanks very much to Ian's, both Ian's. Thanks very much to Ian UAV Hive. If you're on Twitter, find him there. Man of Freedom Information Request. We did make a video about that, and he is holding truth to power a little bit there, as is Richard. Thank you for all your input. Louis, Troublemaker, and the other Ian, thank you indeed. Dear viewers, wherever you are in the world, thank you for being here. Be safe in this current situation. And we'll see you all again at 2100 GMT next week, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Cheers. Press his two buttons. Button number 1, button number 2. There we go.